So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. My name is Chantel Freeman and I'm the Senior Assistant Director of the Office of Online Engagement, and I'll be one of your facilitators this evening. So joining me in facilitation, we have my colleague Becca Lazinsk, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement. And we're both honored to be here with you all for this final Global Days of Service community panel focusing on the pandemic's essential workers. So before we have the pleasure of introducing you to tonight's guests for the panel, we just would like to review a few housekeeping items for the session. So microphones and videos have been removed for participants just to reduce any background noise. You'll notice there's a Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen and it will be present throughout the presentation. So we'll aim to carve out some time at the end of the panel to get to some questions and thoughts. Tonight's panel, including the Q&A, are currently being recorded, so there's no obligation to type or ask any questions for participation in the session this evening. And due to the nature of the topic, please be advised that sensitive situations and contents may be discussed. And we'll also note that Becca and I are not experts in the field, and our panelists all have varying experiences. So tonight's session is intended to be an inclusive learning experience for all. So we're looking forward to learning with you all. And please keep an eye out at the end of our session for our feedback survey, which will plop in the chat. We would appreciate if you could complete that and let us know your thoughts on tonight's session. I would now like to take a minute to share our online accessibility statement with you all, which serves as a reminder of resources available for students. So your experience here at Southern New Hampshire University is important to us. It is our policy and practice to create an inclusive and accessible learning environment. If there are aspects of this event that present barriers to accessibility, please notify the Online Accessibility Center at oac@snhu.edu or by phone at 866-305-9430 or the Campus Accessibility Center at the cac@snhu.edu or by phone at 603-644-3118 as soon as possible. Please provide at least 1 week advance notice to coordinate event accommodations. And as you all know, because you are here, this panel is brought to you by Global Days of Service, which I'll kick over to Becca to share a little bit about.
Thank you. So Global Days of Service is presented by the Office of Alumni Engagement. And traditionally, we've been able to gather in person in the month of April. But of course, like everything else, our plans shifted this year. But it gave us an opportunity to have a service movement from February through May, with each month taking a closer look at a specific social issue. Our goal is to strengthen communities across the globe and bring students, alumni, faculty, and staff together to help. We're offering educational sessions, DIY project ideas, community resources, and spotlights on SNHU community members. You can definitely check out the alumni webpage for more information. And we definitely are also looking to hear and see your stories of what you've been doing to volunteer over the past few months. Even if it hasn't been one of the projects that we've recommended or put together, if you've been doing service over the past few months, we would love to hear from you and learn more about what you're up to. And I'm gonna, I think, bring it back to Chantel.
Perfect. Thanks, Becca. So so as Becca mentioned, it's been a several month-long service sort of focus. So each month we have a different service, and you're all here. We're thinking about spotlighting the pandemic's essential workers. So we thought, in order to frame the conversation tonight, while many of us hear about essential workers and interact with essential workers every day, that it would be nice to just provide a quick overview of essential workers and who they are. So according to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, essential workers are those who conduct a range of operations and services that are typically essential to continue critical infrastructure operations. And critical infrastructure is large, like an umbrella term encompassing sectors from energy to defense to agriculture. So at this point, almost all U.S. states have issued guidance on what they consider essential, despite pandemic-related restrictions, and about half the states defer to federal definitions developed by the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So you can see all these categories here of essential workers. So the CISA guidance and sector-specific list are all here. They're just intended to support states and local governments in their identification of what an essential worker is. So you can see here that's things like healthcare, communication, emergency services, government facilities, all of those pieces. And the remaining states who have issued essential work orders have developed their own lists off of this just to need basically to identify who would need to continue work under stay-at-home orders. So again, this framework is what they kind of use as a starting point, but some states have added and subtracted essential worker categories based on what makes the most sense for them. So in addition to those, there's these. So we have childcare. So majority of states indicate that childcare are essential workers. Critical retail. So folks like grocery workers, food and beverage distribution, and then critical trades. So like construction, HVAC, and things of that nature. So we're fortunate to have 3 panelists with us this evening from the SNHU community who are among the pandemic's essential workers, who will share with us their experiences in the realm and also provide ideas on how people may be able to support essential workers. So if this is your first time joining us for a panel, welcome. And the way that we structure this, Becca and I will be facilitating questions to our panelists, interview style. So panelists will make sure to call on you so you know which one of you would like to answer the question first. And again, you'll all have the opportunity to answer the question. So as a reminder, you'll see the Q&A box at the bottom here. If you have any questions or want to share reflections as they rise, we'd encourage you to do that. And again, we aim to have some time later to address any of those, but we do know a lot of folks have also submitted questions beforehand, which we have carved out time to go ahead and address as well. But know that at the end of this panel, we will share contact information for all of our panelists. So know that you'll have that available to you as well. So I have the honor to introduce our first speaker this evening. So we have Lynn Fitzpatrick with us tonight. So Lynn has lived in New Hampshire all of her life and is married to her best friend of 27 years with 3 grown children and 3 dogs. While she was initially involved in cosmetology while she was younger, Lynn graduated SNHU in 2018 with her associate's degree in communication and will graduate in 2021. Has already, with a bachelor's degree in public administration. Lynn is currently employed by the City of Manchester Fire Department as an emergency dispatcher of EMS and fire, where she works 12-hour shifts, 4 days on, so 2 days and 2 nights, with 4 days off. She averages about 150 calls per day with about 60 emergency calls in a given 12-hour span. Lynn has been dispatching for almost 21 years, 13 and a half with Manchester, and prior to that with 3 communities, police, fire, and EMS. Lynn loves to go camping, kayaking, and biking, and does 5Ks for great causes. Spending time with her family is Lynn's key to everything in life and keeps her grounded.
And I am happy to introduce Adam Tager. Adam grew up in Northern Connecticut and was inspired into service after witnessing the September 11th, 2001 attacks and 2005 Hurricane Katrina. After graduating from American University, Adam embarked a career in law enforcement and later entered government consulting, eventually joining the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. During his time at DARPA, Adam began attending Southern New Hampshire University part-time, earning his Master of Science in Justice Studies in 2016. Since then, Adam has supported FEMA and state emergency management programs from the preparedness, response, and continuous improvement perspectives. He's had roles in all hazards events, most recently serving in multiple roles during the COVID-19 pandemic response and vaccination efforts. Adam is currently a disaster readiness and continuity program analyst with FEMA's Mission Support Bureau Executive Office. Adam married his wife, Allison, in 2019, and the two recently moved to New York City. He is active in service in social organizations, a proud Boston sports fan, and new dog dad to Bernedoodle puppy Locks. I love that dog name, by the way.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, we have Rachael Straehle. So Rachael graduated SNHU in 2016 with a bachelor's in arts and sciences with a degree in psychology. She was the alternative break program coordinator, which is where she gained her passion for service. After graduating, she joined City Year New Orleans as a team leader. She worked with grades 5 through 8 as a science interventionist at Arthur Ashe Charter School. The following year, she stayed at Ashe to serve as the 6th grade special education teacher. For the past 2 years, she has worked as a 1st grade special education teacher at Kip East Primary. In 2019, Rachael obtained her master's in teaching from Relay Graduate School in New Orleans and was just accepted into a BCBA certification program. It's great to have you all with us.
Awesome. Like Chantel said, thank you. I think it's really cool that we have such different perspectives, and I know we're not covering all essential workers, but these are, I think, great roles to be highlighting. And I'd love to start with getting to know everyone. So tell us about yourself and what inspired you to enter your field or to start the career that you have now. Lynn, would it be okay to start with you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you both for having us on. It's a pleasure to be here. Adam, I'm going to hook up with you at the end because I want your email address. Great connections all the way around. So thank you again for having us here. So what inspired me to get involved is I love to be involved. So I was thinking of how best could I be involved in my community. Our job opening for the small town where I live, and I applied, not really knowing anything about what dispatch was. I thought it was just answering a phone, talking into a radio mic. Little did I know. Since then, it's been nonstop for me wanting to learn more, to do more for the community. However, now I work in a larger city just for EMS and fire. There are 2 dispatchers on during our shifts, shall I say. There's not a lot of room for advancement in this position, but I still love what I do because I'm giving back to the community. I'm also on the decon team, which is if something happens to our Seabrook plant, which is our nuclear plant here in New Hampshire, they call upon me to respond so that I can be part of the FEMA decontamination program that we have here in the state. And it's just more or less trying to give back to our community, trying to be a better person.
Thank you. Adam, can I pick on you next?
Of course, thank you. I want to just do a quick disclaimer at the top that I currently work for FEMA and I absolutely love it, but the legalese is that everything that I say tonight is my personal experience and is not representative of FEMA or the federal government. So with that out of the way, my external affairs POC would be happy that I said it. I think it said in my bio that I was kind of inspired to service witnessing 9/11 and witnessing Hurricane Katrina in 2005. But I also come from a family of people who have been involved in the community. You know, my dad and grandfather and grandmother and uncles were local EMTs. Uncle was a law enforcement officer and, you know, involved in local politics and local government. And so I saw the tangible impact that being involved in your local community from an emergency response or from a policy perspective can have, like the sheer impact that can have on people in the community. And so I embarked on actually a career in law enforcement. And about 6 months after starting as a university police officer in DC, we discovered a medical condition that disqualified me from active law enforcement anymore. And so what was I going to do? After bouncing around a little bit, I discovered emergency management, which is the greatest profession that almost nobody knows about, where it's not, you know, your first responders, right? It's not your firefighters, your EMTs, your law enforcement personnel, your doctors and nurses, you know, dispatchers, et cetera. It's kind of one step removed from that. And I love it because we are able to kind of utilize those first responders along with utility workers, along with hospitals, nurses, all of these things to help people not only on their worst day, but try to prevent the worst day, help them on their worst day, and then help them recover from the worst day. And we do that over and over and over again. And so finding that kind of niche where I'm still able to help out at my community, albeit on a little bit of a larger level since I work for a federal agency, has just been super rewarding. And it's a way that I can still contribute and still be involved in the public sector and in response, even though I can't necessarily do so as an active first responder anymore.
That's awesome. It's so interesting to hear how you got there, because I agree. I don't know if I ever would have thought I would have thought of that as a career option. But it seems like a great fit. Rachael, do you want to share how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So mine's also kind of a weird path that got me to teaching. I actually went to a vocational school in high school where you get to choose your own vocation. And I did early education and care. And then I was like, I don't think I actually want to teach. So when I went to SNHU, I went for psychology, and like the first week, all the clubs were meeting, and me and my friends were like, oh, this place has pizza, we should go. And it ended up being the community service club. And I went and volunteered for my first time, and just ended up going to every single session, was later became president, and got involved with the alternate break program. And that just got me really, really excited about service, and was making me think how can I make this my, full-time job. And I ended up doing AmeriCorps. I did City Year, and that brought me to New Orleans. And I went there and I was like, oh yeah, no, I want to do this. And so the next year I stayed on, like it said in my bio, and I fell in love with the city. I fell in love with the kids that I was teaching, and I fell in love just with teaching in general. And now next year is going to be my 5th year teaching, and I'm happy to be here and happy to kind of share my experience of what teaching was like during, this year.
I can only imagine. I can already say thank you. That's really cool. And pizza parties do pay off. That's how we get people in the door in a lot of things, and look at the amazing results that can come from Chantel.
That's awesome. The power of pizza, for sure. Awesome. So what I would love to do is just kind of get your thoughts on thinking about all of your careers and sort of where you ended up now. Maybe some advice that you would give to someone that's just entering your field or your profession. So I know that this last year has been a little atypical, or maybe it hasn't. I mean, you would know. But maybe what advice would you give to someone that's sort of looking to get into the fields that you are all in? And Adam, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think that's a great question, and one that I get a lot from people trying to break into the industry, because number one, you have to explain what emergency management is, and number two, you have to explain different paths to get there. And so there are a couple different paths. A lot of people who are in emergency management are either prior first responder, your firefighters, your EMTs, your law enforcement, prior military. There is emergency management in the military, but also all sorts of vocations in the military, and that's great. But those are very specific perspectives that bring a lot of value to emergency management. But the cool thing about this profession is that it's the professionalization is relatively new, and it's evolving and it's shifting. And so we need those perspectives, but not only those perspectives, so you can come in that way. Or you can take a little bit more of an academic approach, which is kind of how I fell into it when I went to SNHU. I technically got an MS in Justice Studies, but I like to say that I got an MS in emergency management, because I was able to write papers and take courses that kind of helped me break into the industry. I was able to switch from consulting with the Department of Defense Agency to consulting for the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA in particular, which ultimately led to me actually being a federal employee with FEMA. So experience is prized a lot in the industry, again, via first responder, volunteer professional, via military, even volunteer organizations, right? If you're on your local community emergency response team or CERT, if you are involved in organizations like Team Rubicon, which is a great veteran-led disaster response organization, you can bank all those experiences and kind of break into the profession. And the last thing that I want to say, because it's a great program, is there is a program called FEMA Corps, which is part of the AmeriCorps kind of group. And so, Rachel may be familiar with it, maybe not, but it's basically you take a year and it's like you're doing a city year or an AmeriCorps, but you go and you specifically support FEMA. So it's really cool. You get to go to disaster sites and help people. You get to be in supply facilities and do some grunt work of maybe sorting stuff, but really have a tangible part in the response. And a lot of those people transition into FEMA as federal employees. And so those are kind of 3 paths that you can take to get into the industry.
And such a variety of different paths. That's amazing. So that's really cool. And I had not heard of FEMA Corps, so that's really, really cool. So thank you. Rachel, would you like to take it next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 2 main key pieces of advice that I like to give people who are starting off as teachers. My first one is like to think about teaching in general. Like, there's so many different subjects, there's so many different grades, there's so many different ways that you can be an educator. And I think a lot of people, like, I went in middle school, loved my kids, also realized middle school is not what I really have a passion for. And instead of me, like, part of me wanted to be like, I'm a terrible teacher, I should just stop, right? I was feeling really, really frustrated. And then I got moved to first grade kind of like accidentally, and just like absolutely fell in love with it. And I was like, okay, this is where I was supposed to be. And that's okay that I was still struggling when I was teaching middle school. And like, there's so many different things that you can like do, like different subjects, grades, all of that. And my second main thing is like really working to find that balance between like caring too much and caring too little. I think most people that go into education, it's not necessarily for the money. It's because they care for students. And I think it's also, this is something that I'm still constantly working on, like just, lesson planning till 9 p.m. and then going to work the next day and being absolutely exhausted. That's not best for me. That's not best for my children if I'm showing up and I'm so emotionally exhausted. So just like really working to find that balance and being like, unfortunately, there's always more work to be done. And I'm going to be a better teacher tomorrow if I find a way to like self-care for myself. And, everybody preaches that with teachers, but it's just so important to do that when you're entering into like a teaching profession.
So true. That is such great advice. I mean, to your point, I mean, you're not your best self if you've stayed up that late in trying to do all things. And I think with teaching and a lot of these professions that, you are all in, there's never like a leaving at the end of the day, like 5 o'clock quitting time, everything's done, right? Like that's not necessarily the jobs and sort of the vocations that you're all in. So you do have to sort of take care of yourself knowing that that's what you're going into. So great advice. And Lynn, would you like to take that one?
Sure. I think for an emergency dispatcher, the best advice I think I would give someone is you're going to have a cold heart. You really, really will. And it's sad to say it like that, but I have a warm heart. Trust me. I give, but I also have a cold heart when it comes to dispatch, because you're listening to someone's worst nightmare, worst time of their life. It's not yours, but you have to put that barrier up or it becomes yours. And I think that's the hardest part of being a dispatcher for 21 years is you get to be a cold-hearted person. And a lot of people can't understand that, how you can go from being cold-hearted to being warm and sensitive and lovey-dovey when you get home. And it's like, you have to break that barrier somehow. So for me, I break that barrier when I walk in that door. My main life stays behind me at that door. When I get into my chair, I'm there for 12 hours, maybe 24, depending upon whatever I'm doing. And when I leave that place, I make sure that all my guys go home and my girls go home safe and sound to their loved ones as well. And when I leave that room, I leave it in that room. I don't take it with me. I can't take it with me. I think for me, I have had 2 bad calls in my entire career, should I say. One was when I worked for the small community. I had a 16-year-old child. I call him a child. It's not. He's 16. He was 16. Wrapped his vehicle around a tree. And listening to the gentleman that had found him at 2 a.m. in the morning, trying to describe to me what he had seen with body part over here and a body part over here, and the rest of him sitting in his vehicle, was the worst feeling for me, because I'm not there to help this gentleman. I need to find out where he's at, to find out so that I can get my crews to help the child as well as to help him. That was one of my very first alone calls when I worked for the small community. when I first started. I have 3 children and they were all getting to that age of trying to drive at that time. And it really struck home to me. You know, that's the worst feeling in the entire world. The second one was listening to, here in the city, was listening to a person actually getting burned. Her hands, her feet, her butt got burned from a fire because she sat down and couldn't get from her second floor down to the first floor. And hearing the screams and hearing the cries for help, and there's nothing you can do until they get there. While the phone went dead, I don't know what the outcome was. I had to move on to the next call. And I'll tell you, those 2 calls have struck me very, very hard, and they will stay with me. I have nightmares over those 2 calls, and it's not a good feeling. And that's why you get that cold heart. You get that feeling of, what could I have done? What could I have done differently? And there's nothing. You have your protocols, you have your everything in front of you, and there's nothing you can do, unfortunately, to come out of it as a better person. That's why we leave it at the door so that we don't take it home and it hopefully doesn't bother you. So,
And that,
but,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I cannot imagine. And I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, it's a tough situation. So that's when I say the cold-heartedness of it all. That's what I meant by it. Not being a cold-hearted person normally, because there are that too. But you don't want to have that. And I think for this kind of a job, you know, you've got to be able to sit for long hours at a time. You've got to be able to listen to someone's story. And that's, again, is the hardest part, because they're giving you their life history, and you've got to break that down to be able to produce it out to your guys so that you know what they need.
And that yes. And what prepares you for that, right? So thank you for sharing those, traumatic calls. And to your point, I think that it's important for those that are looking into, potentially jumping into that career, is thinking about really being intentional about separating as much as you can with the work. And how do you do that, right? So it's definitely, it can be a personal situation or personal work that you'll need to do. But to your point, it's intentional work that you probably have to do after every single day. So I appreciate you sharing that for sure. So I'll kick it over to Becca to ask our next question.
Thank you. And Lynn, I've had a few conversations with you now. I know that you are not a cold person. So I think it's interesting about you protecting your boundaries, like protecting yourself is how I was interpreting it, to make sure that you can do the job without letting feelings get in the way, which is why I couldn't do it, because my feelings get in the way of everything. So I respect that you are able to turn off what you need to do your job as wonderfully as I'm sure you do. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
My question is that we know that COVID-19 and the pandemic has changed a lot of things for a lot of people, society itself. And I think we've all changed a little bit over this past year. I certainly have. So I'm curious, how have you changed as an individual in the past year? And how do you see your field or profession, your company or employer maybe, having changed in the past year too? Rachel, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think how I've changed is also kind of how I've seen the community change around me, and like my school change as well. Is I think I'm in New Orleans, and I think New Orleans is very known for being very having a really rich culture and very community driven. And I think now more than ever, I've seen it amplify a lot. And I think I think this has helped me stop and reflect and reach out to people that I always was too busy, or use that as an excuse to not reach out to people, to actually build connections with people that I can't see in person, right? People that I've left back up north and things like that. And I think that also has happened in my school as well. So we had last school year off, but we've been back since August, and that takes a whole school building to make sure that people are safe. and like having to build connections that way with students and parents and like other teachers that you're working with is like it's a lot different. But it's like taught me so much, like how important it is to just like check on people and just like that we're all in the same team. These are all of our kids, even though like they're not all in our classroom. And I think that is amplified a lot this year. And I'm really like fortunate for that to continue. Like I feel like that's going to continue with teachers in my school and with me personally.
Thank you for sharing that. Adam.
Sure. This is a great question, and I'll kind of point to three things that I've personally internalized, but I've also kind of seen as transformational for my agency and my profession. So the first one is working with other people. And I know that is, it's something you say at an interview, right? I'm great at working with other people, or I can work on a team. But what I'm talking about in this case, for COVID specifically, is that FEMA's used to taking the lead, right? We're used to something happens. We are the coordinator of a bunch of resources that need to go to help the state, to help the local community, to help the nonprofits that are involved, whatever. At the beginning of COVID, if you remember, the Department of Health and Human Services, at least on a federal level, was in the lead, and FEMA was kind of supporting them. HHS doesn't necessarily have the same coordination and response experience that FEMA does. And so they were relying on us a lot to kind of help and advise them while they were still in the lead. And so how we had to work with them and how I had to work with others in my agency and others in external agencies really shifted, and we had to adapt to working with people in a fundamentally different way than we did before, both as an agency and me in particular. Eventually it did kind of shift, and FEMA was put in the lead in the various iterations of COVID response. But initially it was all very unclear, and the roles and responsibilities and how we had to work with one another really shifted. Which kind of brings me to my second point, which is this concept of resilience. Both on an individual level and on an agency level. Resilience is kind of like the ability to bounce back, right? Something happens, how can you bounce back from that and keep going? FEMA likes to say that our busy season is hurricane season, which is actually coming up in about 2 weeks. So we plan on being super busy from June to November. We have, a little bit of downtime in December, January, February, and then flooding season starts, and then wildfire season starts, and then hurricane season starts. And so beginning of January 2020, is when there was a disaster declaration in all 50 states in our territories, right? And so we had to go from kind of what's considered our recuperation time into active response, right? But that still meant that there were active wildfires. It still meant that we were recovering from past disasters. It still meant that we went into one of the most active hurricane seasons on record last year. And so just as we were kind of working on one thing and it might have settled down a little bit, we had to be resilient and bounce to something else in the bounce, which takes a toll on us as an agency, but also takes a toll on individuals. And I think what Lynn was saying before about having a little bit of that cold heart and a little bit of kind of leaving work at work is something that we needed to develop, and I needed to develop as well. And the final thing that I'll say is, both I learned and hopefully the agency learned and hopefully the profession learned really, is that equity and equality are not the same thing. We, especially at the beginning, when test supplies were very, very limited, I was on a task force, community-based testing site task force, which looked at setting up joint partnerships of task forces in particular areas, New Orleans being one of them, to get people tested to see if they had COVID-19. This was obviously before we had a vaccine and before we had large supplies of testing kits. So we were getting them to a lot of communities, but a lot of times the communities that are represented in data or that have advocates to bring testing sites are not necessarily the same communities that really, really need them. Because if they don't have their advocates, they're probably a little bit more of an underprivileged or disadvantaged community, or vulnerable community is the term we like to use. And so once we started using the social vulnerability index, from the U.S. Census, we were actually able to better pinpoint where our resources should be going, especially when they were scarce. I think we've seen a lot of examples outside of my profession illustrating the difference between equality and equity. But sometimes, in order to help all of us, you need to divert more resources into communities that need them more at the expense of communities that can probably get them on their own, right? If we had all the time and money in the world, we would treat everybody. We would help as many people as much as we can, right? But we need to be equitable in what we do, both in terms of how we respond to floods and how we get people to rebuild and the money that goes to them. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that. But those are kind of the three main things that I saw our profession evolve into, and that I kind of took to heart as well.
Every point was super interesting and totally makes sense, but maybe things that we hadn't thought about until we're faced with it, especially or including that your other work didn't stop during the pandemic. I think that's probably true for a lot of essential workers. I think of Rachael and Lynn, what you guys are doing is similar, that you still had to get your job done while there was a lot of other things happening around you. So thank you for sharing that, Adam. Lynn, what have you learned, and what do you think that your profession or current employer have learned over the past year?
So I'm going to take it from the second part first. So basically, we had to man all of the telephone lines at the very beginning of when COVID hit. So there were 6 lines that we set up in our firehouse to answer questions, to help the public get tests, get answers, find out information that they couldn't get otherwise, either from the TV or newspapers or whatever. We did this for the first 2 months of the pandemic. So I was really never home because I worked 96 hours a week for almost 2.5 months straight. It was insane. My company learned, or the fire department, I think, learned what we did well was to answer questions, be there for people to the best of our ability. What to have more on hand of is going to be a challenge for us going forward, I think. The wipes, the cleaning products more so. What we have learned that we did well, I think, is that we were prepared enough that we knew that we couldn't work at home. We had to be in the firehouse in order to get the job done. Also, how well we work together with the other agencies, whether it was the state or AMR, which is our ambulance service, or the police department, to make the most of what we had. Having that was the lesson in itself, because we were relying upon each other to make sure that we were okay. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned was that I was really unprepared for this. I mentally was unprepared at how devastating it was for a lot of people. Not ever realizing, that the South was having that hit that hard. Not that I was going crazy about it, but I was worried for people, for getting COVID. My mom is 84 years old. She just turned 84. I was concerned for her because she was still going out to the food store. I'm like, no, there's no way you can tell an 84-year-old female that she has to stay home. And that was hard for me to really come down on her and tell her she really needed to stay home, because I saw what was going on. I had more intel than she was getting from the TV. So making sure that was a priority for me was hard, especially working the 96 hours in some weeks. My husband, he's a frontline, he's a lieutenant on the fire department here in the city. So making sure that he was safe, making sure that my son, who just graduated with his fire science, who now is going to be a fireman, making sure that they're all safe, along with my 2 daughters, making sure that they had enough as well. Of what they needed, not to be able to, have any problems. And I think that was the hardest part for all of us to understand, was really more or less what was happening in the world. And I think, like Adam said, it was just, you still had to keep moving, and you still had to go to work every day and keep doing your same job. But I think overall, I think we've all got a lesson out of it somehow, some way. Each of us has learned something from this whole experience.
I hope so and think so. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Were you also, I know you just finished your degree, so were you a student at this time, also trying to balance school?
Yep, completely.
That was my mind.
And 96 hours, I would put school on hold for, a couple weeks and then try to read in the downtime that we had. But it didn't work.
That's hard.
It is. It was really difficult, but if you want something, you got to do it.
That's an incredible lesson for all of us. I'm so impressed by that. Thank you for sharing, especially when I put you on the spot with that question, but I'm just so impressed. I'll pass it off to you.
It's very impressive. That's why you're impressed. So I would say, so my next question, so it's actually very similar, but it's thinking about the pandemic, of course, and thinking about, you all kind of talked a little bit about what you fundamentally learned, or sort of the places that you're all working throughout this, right? So maybe communicating differently, or being intentional about communication, or collaborating with, various other departments or other affiliated agencies, if you will. So thinking about you and thinking about, the day that not the day, but the times we're coming up against, right? So we're coming out of a pandemic. So what are some of the changes, or what is a change that you would like to keep with you? Thinking about the pivots and all of the adjustments that we've all had to make. What is a lesson that either you or just us as a society and country you would like us to continue coming out of this pandemic, which will happen? So Lynn, how about we start with you?
Great question. I've given a lot of thought to this question. I think just realizing that it's not about us, it's about everyone in itself. Knowing what certain areas of the country have gone through, more so New York, LA, seeing the ambulances lined up in front of the hospital just tore me apart, literally tore me apart. And I think that's the biggest lesson right there. And knowing that we have other parts of the country that we need to assist and help with, that maybe it's not money wise, maybe it's, supplies, or it's, just reinforcements, whatever they need. I think that's what we should be focusing on more so. Teachers, they've struggled a lot, and I think kudos to them more so than anything else. They had the tougher job of us all, in my eyes, them and nurses. Because they had to see the kids through a screen like this, and not being able to be there for those kids, I think is very difficult, because sometimes you just need that pat on the back. Hey, you're doing a great job. And you can't do that if you're through a screen. How are you going to do that? Pat yourself. But it's not true, so I think that's what I would like to see more so of, is the giving. More giving.
I love that. And to your point, I mean, after the year that everybody's had, I think just being empathetic and compassionate towards other humans, as we all are humans, I think that is so, so crucial. And to your point, there's been, everybody's tired. So it'd be nice to have everybody be a little more kind after this. Adam, do you want to take this one next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I echo Lynn, this is a great question. And actually one of the things is very similar to what she was saying, which I think is a great point. I kind of have one or two high level things and then one very tangible thing that I'm passionate about, but just having a bit more grace in general, right? Everybody this year has obviously had to deal with the same national pandemic, but that didn't mean that they weren't dealing with their own personal struggles that existed before, were probably exacerbated by and will continue after the pandemic. And so I think we really got an appreciation of the personal struggle that everybody's having, including the first responders who you may interact with and may have not been able to provide the best customer service that they would like to, because you're one of 100 people that they're seeing, or the teacher who could not spend as much one-on-one time with your child because it's through a computer screen and they've got 30 kids going on and off camera and on and off mute throughout the day. I don't have experience in that. I'm sure Rachel will touch on that. So just having a little bit more grace in understanding the second point, that everybody has their place in society. Who would have thought a couple of years ago that grocery store workers would have been considered essential workers and on the front lines of the pandemic? But they were. Everybody needs food. Public utility workers are often, or even sanitation workers are often underappreciated, underpaid, but they were really on the front lines of this. Nurses, teachers, everybody has their place in society and everybody plays a role. And I think we should better appreciate that moving forward. I think we did get a good appreciation that, and I would love if we didn't forget it. And finally, on a little bit more of a tangible level, and we were discussing this a little bit before the panel started, but we've opened up this whole new world of engagement through being able to interact on Zoom or Ring Central or via phone or via Teams or Skype or whatever. We've been able to engage. For those of us that have had the luxury of working from a different place or working from home, or even connecting with people that are not in our physical area, it's opened up so many opportunities. Even though I recently relocated from DC to New York, I've been able to stay engaged with some of the organizations I was active with in DC. I'm not physically in New Hampshire. I couldn't participate in a day of service event, but I can be here on this panel through the power of technology. This is also going to open up a whole new world of people who can work for companies or work in industries that may not have otherwise been able to access. We're going through this at FEMA right now. We've got 10 regional offices throughout the country and our headquarters in DC. But there's this whole wide and diverse group of people that we can tap into if we don't make you live in one of those cities. And that's going to increase our ability to do our job. It's going to increase the diversity of perspectives that we have in our industry and in our agency. And I really hope we don't lose that because there's just so much good that can come out of it. Of course, not everything can be virtual all the time, but having a little bit more leniency for that, I think will be really value add to our society.
Such great points. And to your point, we would not have over half of this panel tonight if we didn't have this, this platform to be able to do that. So such great points. Thank you so much. And Rachel, would you like to close it out on what you'd like to continue after the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was thinking, just like kind of both of you touched upon, like the broader picture of like having grace with people. And I think more specifically to like working with children, I think for those of you who don't know, New Orleans is all charter schools, and it happened right after Katrina as, unfortunately, kind of an experiment to see what happens if we, make an entire city charter schools. And within that, it's created this, there's obviously positive and negatives, but I think one of the big things is that your school, if it fails the state test, like a certain amount of kids, then your school is shut down. And it creates this really big, it's just all about data. And sometimes that can be a little problematic, right? We want our kids to succeed. We want to know our schools are succeeding. At the same time, this year, as someone who trained to be a teacher in New Orleans, I feel like I was so obsessed with data because I was that's literally what my pay raise is how much I can make my kids grow. And this year I've been able to reflect and be like, actually, that's disgusting that I had that viewpoint, and sitting down with myself and being like, okay, everybody is going through this. And I feel like as a society, we kind of forgot about kids. We forgot that kids are also going through this trauma and don't even know what it is. I work with first graders with, and some of them have significant disabilities, and they obviously know something's happening, but they can't express the change in routine and going from learning on a computer to learning in person, or having their class quarantine because someone caught COVID and things like that, that is clearly affecting them. And this year I got to spend time really being like, my number one priority is that my kids feel safe emotionally and physically. And that is my number one priority, not them gaining points on their test. That is like, that comes second or third or whatever it is. And I really am excited that I had that shift in perspective as a teacher, because that is my number one priority and it will continue to be my number one priority. And I'm like, yeah. Sorry, it's
Definitely.
long-winded.
No, never be sorry. I mean, the year that you, like the giving and all, and to your point, I mean, it's really tough with especially littles, where they don't have the words to identify what they're feeling. And to your point, this will be lasting, and thinking about how to kind of work through some of those traumatic experiences and sort of a long span of just very uprooting of, for folks like our age, it's already tough, so thinking about, littles where they don't necessarily have the words to be able to speak to. So kudos to you for continuing to do all of that work, because that is very challenging work and also important. So awesome. So I'll kick it over to Becca.
Thank you. So since we have just a little bit of time left, I think we're going to move it to questions that have been sent in. This went by so quick. I could talk to all of you for another hour, but I won't put you through that. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that were sent in, and I'm going to start with, how would you recommend people get involved if they want to help essential workers? I think as we have looked at Global Days of Service, people are looking to take an action, to do something to help. Do you have any suggestions on actions they can do or small things in their community that may add up? Adam, I'll give this one to you first.
Yeah, it's great to hear this question, because it means that people are service-minded and they're looking to get involved and help out, which is just a great indicator of where we are as a society, especially after what we've been through over the past year and a half and even previous to that. There's a couple things. From an emergency management perspective, there are local organizations called community emergency response teams, or there's local health service corps, where you can actually get involved and get training and be there on the front lines with your community to help, respond to recover from events, be it from a public health perspective or a tangible medical perspective. You can become an EMT, or be on a CERT team. If you don't want to do that, if that's too much, there are lots of great charities that help people that are disadvantaged and haven't necessarily had access to the same resources, food, water, shelter, that a lot of us have. And I think if you can't make a time commitment, a financial commitment to any number of those great organizations, including American Red Cross, or your local food bank, I think is a really good thing. We've seen the need for food, water, shelter really go up over the past year and a half. And then finally, there was a third point that I had that I wanted to remember. If you can't do both of those, you probably have a neighbor who hasn't been able to get all of the things that they need. I know some friends who, especially here in New York City, have neighbors that maybe are elderly or maybe are high risk for a different reason. Check in with them. Do they need somebody to go grocery shopping for them? Do they need somebody to, they can't use technology and they want to, Skype or FaceTime or anything with their kids or with their grandkids? If you've had the skills, you can help out on a tangible and personal level. And so I know we're running short on time, so I'll stop there.
Oh, that was perfect. They give so many different ways for people to get involved, and how to help our own community, the people next door that are right there waiting for us. Thank you. Lynn?
A note of thanks goes a long way. I know it sounds cliche to say it that way, but I know for us, the guys downstairs, shall I say, or the firehouses, they get food brought in all the time. They don't share it with anyone because there's enough guys to eat it all. But a note of thanks to the dispatchers, to your 911 operators, because they're there 24/7 to answer those calls every single day, no matter what, whether they're sick, whether they're anything. And a note of thanks really goes a long way for that feeling of, hey, somebody remembered us, Everybody thanks a fireman. Everybody thanks a police officer. but what about those dispatchers? You know, and I'm only saying dispatchers, not just because I work as a dispatcher, but it's important, even for your public works dispatchers. They have a dispatcher as well. But by thanking them in a letter or a note of thanks, hey, you know, buy them coffee, because we drink enough coffee on a daily basis, let me tell you. And again, I'm thinking outside of the box. That's what you always want to try to do, is think outside of the box for something that you may want to do for your community. And I agree with all of Adam's points as well. Helping a neighbor.
That was perfect. Thank you. I agree. Like, as we get to be more of a technology-driven society, sometimes we forget about those handwritten notes that make a big difference. And I'm sure even an email thank you would be appreciated, but if we can write it, we can hold on to it. Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. You both hit on some really good points. I think with school or teachers in general, I think there's three good ways, right? We talked about financially, like helping out schools. I think like volunteering, just like there's a lot of like literacy tutoring, just like if you can give time, I think that's super beneficial for kids to have like role models outside of that classroom. And I think my last one is just like, also when it comes to service, I feel like we forget about like advocacy as well. And I think like just seeing like the schools that I've, you know, worked in, I think it's just super important to like continue to just talking to people and like advocating for kids in our education system and like really making that equitable, and just like that goes a long way as well.
Thank you. It's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. Chantel.
Great. So it's actually already 8:28. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. This was warp speed. So again, thank you, all of you for your time. Lynn, Adam, and Rachel, you've been fantastic. And we appreciate everybody that's been joining us. Thank you so much for everybody in this new community that's joined us and turned out to talk more about this important, you know, essential workers have made the world literally go round the last year and will continue to. So we appreciate you all. The work that you three do in your all professions is just inspiring. So if people want to stay connected, I wanted to share also the emails for our panelists that they've graciously shared. So you can go ahead if there's any other questions or if you'd like to reach out, you should be able to see that contact right there. So you'll also find the information for Becca and myself if you have any other Global Days of Service related questions. And with that, we're just about at 8:30 and the event has officially come to an end. So on behalf of Becca and I with the Offices of Alumni and Online Engagement, we just thank you all. Thank you to our presenters for just the important work that you do each and every day and for spending your evenings with us. And thank you for all our attendees, and thank you to Media Services, who's behind the curtain, who's supporting this event this evening. We could not be doing it without you. And be sure to visit the Global Days of Service website for event details, to find ways to be involved. You'll be able to find the recording for this event as well. And we still have all of May left. So there are a lot of really wonderful ways to get involved, to help out your communities, to help out some essential workers. So be sure to check that out. And if you are participating in service, please share your stories with us. So we appreciate you all, and we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your Thursday evening. Thanks all.